Welcome to Texans On Tap, episode 12. I'm Brandon Strange alongside Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. Follow them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975. Jack Brain producing behind the scenes. To support this channel, all you have to do is hit like on this video. And this podcast is also available on your favorite podcast app. Gents, it's week 8. We're rested, refreshed. So are the Texans and Panthers, who were both on bye week 7. Sorry, Charlie, I know that's not your preferred term. The Texans travel to Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte with the intent of withdrawing a win, but the Panthers currently have a negative balance at 0-6, sitting alone in second place with the Texans at 3-3. The Texans look to put their balance in the green for the first time since 2019. That's all the bank jokes, I swear. It's a matchup of top drafted QBs. Texans currently appear to be on the plus side of that draft. How do you see C.J. Stroud matching up against this Panthers defense this week, Charlie?
We'll be watching with interest. What do you think? You get to monopolize cornball bank references? Look, the Panthers are a well-balanced team. They pretty much stink at everything. Their talent level, both sides of the ball, is just not up to snuff. They do have a couple of former first-round draft picks. Brian Burns is a quality pass rusher. Rumors about Carolina maybe being open to trade him ahead of the deadline if they were to get a king's ransom for him. So that seems unlikely. Derek Brown's a pretty good defensive lineman, a number 1 pick back in 2020. But unless the Texans' offensive line collectively nods off, and that's an area that should be as healthy as it's been at any point in the season, I mean, all the matchups look pretty favorable in this game for the Texans, which might be the one cause for concern. It just seems too obvious that even on the road, this should be easy.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to be looking at the run game. D'Amico's been talking about getting that run game going. This is their best opportunity to do so. 31st. It's, I believe, where they are in rushing yards per game, the Carolina Panthers. They're giving up 144 yards per game. So second to last. So if there's ever a week, if it'll be interesting, are we going to see Singletary continue to get more carries this week? Or will they go back to Dameon Pierce after the off week? Maybe they've worked on this. Hopefully they've worked on this, getting that ground game going. They've said how important it is to them. So I think that's where the weakness is, because if you look at the passing yards, they're ninth in passing yards allowed per game. Under 200 is what Carolina's given up. So that's kind of the Texans' strength, is they're top 5 in passing yards, but that's where Carolina is good. So maybe they focus on the run a little bit. But when I just look at the pure numbers, it makes sense why they are where they are. They are 31st in points allowed per game. The Panthers, 31st, and they're giving up 31 points per game. How many points are they scoring? 18.7. So when you're scoring about 19 points a game and you're averaging giving up 31, there's a reason why you're 0-6.
Yeah, what we do need to factor in with fewer games in the NFL, a really bad game or two, especially just 6 games into the season. Conversely, a really good game or two. Strength of schedule, quality of opponent. The Panthers' last 2 games have come against 2 of the best offenses in the NFL. Now, they gave up 42 points in each of them, but the Lions, their road hiccup over the weekend aside, and the Dolphins, right? They're putting points up on pretty much everybody, the Dolphins eating it at Philadelphia aside. But Carolina is in the midst of an absolute disaster. Frank Reich comes in as the head coach, supposed quarterback guru. Really? It was a turnstile in Indianapolis after Andrew Luck retired. Young guys and old guys. Reich 0-6, and, shades of Bill O'Brien's tenure, what you've given up in some trades, and specifically the Bryce Young trade, in contrast to C.J. Stroud, where the Texans are. I think I said 2-3 weeks ago, I'd love to sodium pentothal Nick Caserio that if the Texans had the first pick, would it have been Young or would it have been Stroud? Because I think probably a majority opinion among NFL decision makers was Young, the more polished and developed quarterback coming out. But he looks like a little boy running around against men. Maybe he'll figure it out, but he's so slight of build, right? Kyler Murray's been messed up, and ACL can happen to anyone, but Kyler Murray had an ankle problem the year before that, and he's solidly built. Pre-washed up Russell Wilson, only 5'10", but very solidly built. Young is very slight of build, right? He had to beef up to get to 194 or whatever it was at the combine. Nobody looks at C.J. Stroud going up against the Carolina Panthers' lousy defense or any other defense and thinks, well, geez, physically, he's overmatched. He'll be lucky to survive this game. Whereas Bryce Young, that's going to be an ongoing question with his tenure for Carolina. And it's a franchise record for several years for the Panthers if they got it wrong.
Well, if they are going to put the hit on him, it's not going to happen according to the stats. Right now, after the off week, Texans dead last in sacks with 8. I can see Brandon nodding there. So it's like, are they going to be able to get to Bryce Young and get him on the ground? That's what we've been waiting for. That's why they got Will Anderson. They got to get going and get some pressure on the passer.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment. That's one of the things the Texans haven't done. Their defense has been a pleasant surprise this season, but one thing they have not been able to do is get back and get that quarterback. What kind of opportunity specifically do you see for DeMeco's defense in getting after Bryce Young?
Yeah, and I don't know whether D'Amico specifically, consciously has said, I'm not going to sell out with blitzing and make a habit of running 6-7 guys at the quarterback and risk exposing a secondary, which has played very well to this point, especially with no Derek Stingley. I just think there are spots while the Texans are much improved in terms of fundamental talent level, and clearly coaching staff, which is well ahead of what we've seen here over the last 3 years, but they still have talent gaps, right? Will Anderson's pressure numbers are strong. The sack numbers are okay, but who's going to be the sidekick? Are we at the point where it's really not going to be John Grenard as a long-term solution? And no one else on this defense has the pedigree that you're saying, well, he should be a quality pass rusher. Maybe that's the guy who blossoms into a hellraiser. So I think we're in an offseason where you're going to have $60, $70 million of cap space after you settle on extensions and qualifying offers and so forth. Going after a guy who can bring some heat opposite Anderson's the number one priority on the defensive side. Maybe a more athletic linebacker if you want someone who can be a blitz edge rusher. Just as on the offensive side, much improved. CJ Stroud not getting sacked a whole lot, but I still think they were one offensive lineman away from having a unit that thinking, okay, this is good. And that's factoring, well, Juice Scruggs finally gets healthy, and if he settles in at the center spot, and then you can have Howard back at right tackle, where I think he belongs, Tunsil on the left side, Shaq Mason right guard, so left guard. So there are just a couple of spots where the Texans are talent short. A lot of teams are that way, but at 3-3 and with 2 more games against the NFC South, they are on the very much plus side of the curve from where anyone would have hoped them to be, say, in August.
Yeah, I think a little bit of rest will certainly help with Will Anderson. These rookies coming in the NFL, and it's a new experience. So having an extra week of rest, working with the coordinators, putting a nice game plan together will certainly help. When I look over at the other side of the Panthers, Miles Sanders been banged up. He's been dealing with injuries. They paid him a lot of money to play running back for them, and he's dinged up again. On the positive side for the Panthers, Adam Thielen is having an incredible bounce back season. He's an older receiver that's just putting up huge numbers. I mean, he's already over 500 yards for the season with 4 touchdowns, and they're only through 6 games. But, he's not a burner type player. He's a great possession receiver that's, like I said, a little long in the tooth. So hopefully Steven Nelson can keep him in check. But he's the main guy, him and DJ Chark, but mostly Thielen. That's who he's been looking for. That's been Bryce's guy this year.
And credit to Thielen after health undermined the end of his tenure with Minnesota. But my hedge on that is when you're behind a lot, your running game blows. You're going to throw the ball a lot. Well, someone's going to catch at least some passes. As you alluded to, Josh, he's not really that game-breaking, put the fear of God in you as a defensive coordinator, a member of the Texan secondary. And again, on Carolina, there but for the grace of the football gods go I. What they gave up for Bryce Young, right? They don't have a big threat number 1 wide receiver, because they traded him in DJ Moore to the Bears as part of the Bryce Young package. Carolina sitting 0-6, odds on to have the number 1 overall pick in the spring. Well, that pick belongs to the Chicago Bears, as does Carolina's 2nd-round pick in 2025, the final remaining payoff. So it looks like an epic botch job. It's too early to be, calling the hearse for Bryce Young's NFL career, but they have to be just scared to death. And Reich obviously got paid in a restart of the clock after going directly from getting fired mid-season last year by Indy to getting the Carolina job to nurture whichever quarterback they were going to hire or draft at the time they hired Reich ahead of the draft. But he's already relinquishing play calling duties to his offense coordinator, Thomas Brown. And you mentioned Miles Sanders. Funny, it turns out that you're a real effective rusher when running behind the best offensive line in football, which Sanders was behind in Philadelphia. Last year, a 1,200-yard back. Never in his 4 seasons with the Eagles did he average below 4.6 yards per carry. Well, now with Carolina running behind a sieve, he's at 3.1.
CJ and Bryce are forever going to be, I guess, bundled together just because of where they were taken in the draft. How do you guys see this matchup kind of shaping the narrative regarding these two quarterbacks?
It's amusing, at least on this side of the coin, that it doesn't seem a fair fight, that CJ Stroud is better and has a better supporting cast. Even though the Texans remain early in the process, Bryce Young, there's certainly no questions about his character, as there weren't any questions about CJ Stroud's character either. But, taking quarterbacks high in the first round is ostensibly a coin flip. The probably defining one of all time. There were at least a handful of general managers. Boy, I love Ryan Leaf's tools. I'd leave Peyton Manning on the board and take Ryan Leaf number 1. Lower level, but Drew Bledsoe and Rick Mirer were the two quarterbacks of many teams' desires. Bledsoe went on to a real good career until an injury opened up a door for that Brady character, whereas Rick Mirer was basically a bust. So, on the early scorecard, it's CJ Stroud hit, Bryce Young miss, but if we're in golf, obviously we're on like the second hole.
Yeah, I mean, we're only through 6 games, but it's funny how much the narrative has changed. I think if you would have asked the Colin Cowherds of the world, the Panthers or the Texans, who would be 0-6, he probably would have said the Texans. One week, and then
the other he'd have changed his mind.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it's caught a lot of people by surprise that it's turned out this way. But I think the Texans had a little more talent than we thought. I think D'Amico and Bobby Slowick have been pleasant surprises. And we talked about Thielen. Well, Nico Collins has been that guy for, CJ Stroud. He's got over, he's almost 550 yards through 6 games. So, I mean, he's on a great trajectory as well. And we should see Tank Dell back this week. I think that should help CJ quite a bit to have kind of his main favorite toy weapon out there, just breaking big plays. That's what he can do. The other thing is Dalton Schultz is starting to come on, starting to catch touchdowns every game, becoming a reliable red zone threat. I'm curious if his production was just because Tank Dell's been out. Is that why the uptick happened? Or is this something that they continue doing? I'm not sure, but look, everybody's going to be pointing at this game. It's CJ versus Bryce. They don't actually play each other. We know that. They play the opposing defenses, but that's what's going to be talked about. And I mean, I don't even think this is going to be close. We haven't mentioned it. I think the spread's at 3 the last time I checked. So Texans on the road favored by 3. I believe the total's around 42 points, 42.5. So not a huge scoring game here, but I think the Texans win pretty convincingly as I'm looking at this.
The Texans finally have a nucleus of young players. Right? They're no better than the midpoint of the build back up. But, starting with Stroud, but beyond that, there are pieces of the puzzle that you're saying, okay, this is good. Carolina, if your brightest light offensively is a 31-year-old wide receiver, I mean, you're going nowhere and probably on a fast track to staying there. Can you be on a fast track to staying somewhere? If so, that's where Carolina is, especially with that draft capital they still owe Chicago from the Bryce Young trade.
So we close out every episode with predictions. So, Josh, you alluded to kind of give us a hint of where you're going with this. Give me some final scores of this game.
Maybe just something like 28-17, something like that.
Okay. 27-13 was what popped into my head. Okay. Again, I want to put the caveat, some things that seem too good to be true or too easily coming into existence, buyer beware, better beware, all that. But this would be the first loss of the season that would be a real disappointing loss. Any loss is disappointing. The heartbreaker at the end in Atlanta. But, the Falcons are a middling type team, and the game was on the road. Okay, this is on the road, but the Panthers are 0-6. I don't expect them to make a run at 0-17. They do have more NFC South games to come. But to use the word merely 3-point favorites with the Texans on the road. But it sure seems like you should give the number.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for episode 12 of Texans on Tap. I like those predictions, by the way. And I want to give a quick note. This is the tailgate is happening this week on Wednesday. Come out and join us. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, they are available at tailgate.culturemap.com. Remember to use that promo code SPORTSMAP to get $10 off. Tailgate inspired food from some of the best restaurants in Houston that will be there. So that is Wednesday, October 25th at Silver Street Studios in Houston. We'll be back next week to recap this game, hopefully talking about a win. Hopefully we're talking about the Texans being above 500 for the first time in a couple of years. Thanks for listening. And as always, go Texans.